Okay, God knows what went wrong with that. There was some bug in the software. It hasn't come back during this one, so I've now got it working properly again. So I've got those. That's the basic Graziani system. Everything's stabilizing. I'm now using time lags. I've got the time lag for production, given the amount of money in the firm sector is GDP, turnover in the economy. So the purchase of all goods and services, workers' share of that is the wage. And I've got the time consumption for bankers and a time constant for the consumption rate for workers as well. All works. So let's now keep on going and take a look at comparing neoclassical visions of what money lending is really about to post-Keynesian. So by doing the stuff I've shown you there, I've shown that the circuit's idea is actually better than they realise. Okay? It is a viable description of a monetary economy. What I want to now do is compare the neoclassical argument about private debt not mattering because assets equals liabilities to the endogenous money case that debt matters is crucial. So here's a few quotes from Krugman, who's the archetypal neoclassical. Contrary to what you might think, debt does not make society as a whole poorer. One person's debt is another person's asset. So total wealth is unaffected. It can rise, it can fall, no impact. On he goes. Looking at the world as a whole, we see that the overall level of debt makes no difference to aggregate net worth. One person's liability, another person's asset. And he said the level of debt, again, only matters if the distribution matters. So the level's unimportant in its own right. It's only the distribution that matters. And then, you know, we've got a big problem with debt if it's a large amount of debt versus a smaller distribution matters, but generally you can ignore it. Whereas the circuit theory says that debt matters because money is the liability of the banks, and what we actually manifest our demand for commodities in is using bank liabilities. So you have to treat the assets and the liability side of the banks in a different way. And this is just going through Graziani's basic 3 points again. For a monetary economy to exist, first of all, money has to be a token, so it can't be a commodity. Otherwise, it would just be a barter system. Secondly, it has to be accepted as means of final payment, otherwise it's credit rather than just money. Thirdly, it can't give seigniorage to the person producing it, and therefore the only way to make all those conditions work is if money is actually promises to pay the third agent. So the liabilities of that agent, which promises are a liability, okay, the promises of that agent are what actually enable demand to occur in a monetary economy. So loanable funds would actually say that's all irrelevant, it's just lending from a patient agent to an impatient agent. And that's precisely how Krugman describes it in his academic work. So there's an increase in liabilities for one but a decrease in the other, overall no change. And nothing is happening on the asset side of the bank, ultimately. But they talk about lending from reserves, but pretty much they argue, the argument ultimately comes down to it, the bank is just an intermediary. So you don't need to worry about what's happening on the asset side of the bank. Versus post-Keynesian, where the loan is an increase on the asset side, matched by an increase on the liability side. So that's the difference in vision. Well, let's model them both together. And I'll start off by putting in the loanable funds model. And here's Krugman's argument again, that rising debt is not the economy as a whole borrowing more money. It's a case rather of less patient people borrowing from more patient people. Notice the pejorative element there. Who's the better person? The patient person or the impatient person? There's a bias in favour of the patient person. That sort of thing. And here's him talking about, his idea of lending, if I decide to cut back on my spending, stash the funds in a bank, which lends them out to someone else, it doesn't have to represent a net increase in demand. Well, let's just see what he's talking about, but let's bring that in. Here's the model as it stands. Let's bring up the Doppler table. And I've got reserves in there for a moment for a deliberate reason, because I now want to add in an extra element here. We're going to have patient people turning up. Now notice I've got to be careful here, because it's made this into an equity when it should be a liability, and that's lost its asset class. So more stuff for Russell to fix up when he gets back from his holiday in China. Okay, I've now got the patient agent, and we're saying the patient agent deposits money in the bank. Well, let's say there's $100 extra, which is shown as a liability of the bank, of course, minus 100, and so reserves go forward to 120. Whoops. 1120. Now, are we right there or wrong? I've got something. Okay, that should be. What have I got? I've got 100, 200 worth there versus 100 there. Cut them back to, so make them 180. It should be 200. Let's go. 120 should work. Let's see. What's going on? Let's see. 80, 120. It's 200. Oh, pardon me. That's not. Yeah, I'm not looking at the. I'm looking at the equity column rather than looking at what I'm thinking about, which is the overall balance. Just bring this across and just check that. Yeah, the row sum is 0. That's what I was worried about. Okay. So that's correct. So now we need to have a row where the patient lends to inpatient. That's going to be lending by patient across to the inpatient agent, who in my argument is the firm sector. And then there has to be interest payments to the patient agent, which in this case is a transfer of money from the firm sector to the patient agent, getting interest payments out of it. And of course, having done that, you can then have consumption by the patient agent, so they can have consumption by themselves of what's being produced by the inpatient agent, otherwise known as the firm sector. There's 3 more elements in the system. So let's now treat those the same way we treated the other elements there. Lending by the patient agent, interest payments to the patient agent, and consumption by the patient agent. And I'll relate lending by the patient agent to the amount of money in the patient agent's account, and interest payments, that's going to be slightly more complicated because I've got the extra money inside there. What have I got? Because I've got this separate amount, the amount of money in the account is actually, there's some money in there already which has come from the loan from the firm sector. So I'll need to make that something like interest on that component of the loan. So I've got to subtract the $80 that's currently there. Slightly complicated to do it, but let's give that a try. So the interest is going to be the, again, hang on, I'll just make it the same rate of interest the bank charges. Delete that one, copy that. It's going to be the amount of money in the firm sector minus that initial condition, which was $80 of the money that they first of all got from the firm sector. I don't want to be doing any double charging here, so that'll be the rate of interest multiplied by the amount in the firm sector minus the amount they already got from the banking sector. And consumption by the patient agent, I'll have they're going to have a time constant, but since they're even more patient than the bankers, I'll get them to target 2 there rather than 1 year. 2 years to consume the money in their accounts. So now I need to include the lending. Well, that's going to be based on the amount of money in the patient agent's account. Bring that over here. So that's the consumption side of the patient agent. And I now need to have the lending, so I'm going to have the time lag in lending by the patient agent, so I call that tau LP. Let's say to take them 10 years to lend all their money out. So divide that down here. save this before I keep on going. I'll call it Krugo 1. Pray that it works. Not the little bug beforehand. Let's see. Yep, everything stabilizes still. Let's now just take a look at what's happening to the patient agent's account. They're the new entry in the system. I chose edit and it disappeared. I'm going to try running it again. Stop. Right, that may be the bug that I got beforehand. Skip messages. Let's see. File. Redraw. I think I may have chosen delete by accident there. Let's copy that again, bring it down here, wire it up again and see if that works. That might be what the bug came from. It might have been the bug from me clicking on the wrong button. Yeah, okay, it all works still. Let's now copy patient agent, graph what's happening in the patient agent's account. And that finally stabilizes, so everything's stabilizing out there. Let's now see what happens if you have a change in the level of borrowing by the patient agent, whether they lend more money. Because remember I had aggregate demand calculated before, and that's GDP over here. Let's just make space to put a graph of GDP on here. This is where you start needing a high resolution screen to show all the bits and pieces that turn up in this model. But have a copy of GDP, graph it down here. So GDP ultimately stabilizes as well. Well, let's now make this a variable. So I'm going to change this to what's called a slider. And I'm going to say the number of years that the patient agent could take to lend all the money in their account could be as fast as 1 year or as long as 100, and make it jump in steps of 1 year at a time. And now let's go back and start it again. It's starting from 10. There's aggregate demand. And if I make the patient agent run really slowly, tiny impact on aggregate demand, and really quickly, tiny upward impact on aggregate demand. Notice the little movements there? Pretty small. So if we're saying changing the amount of lending doesn't have much of an impact. There's a bit, that drop there, or the increase, means there's been, that was a drop in lending, that was an increase in lending. Not much impact. So he's right. If that's the way lending works, you can pretty much ignore the level of debt in the economy. It's a bit of an impact, but you wouldn't get your knickers in a twist about the importance of the level of debt. So that's his vision. Now about endogenous money. Well, that comes into the argument that I gave you first of all from Alan Holmes, that banks extend credit, creating deposits in the process, and look for reserves later. So now I'm going to say what happens when you bring that in. Well, that involves bringing in a change on the asset side. I'll just save this before I do anything else. It's file save. That's now a change which turns up on the asset side of the banking sector. We need another column down here, which is lending by the bank. And that's going to be an increase on the asset side of the bank ledger, matched by an increase on the liability side. So we now need to include that variable. I'm running out of space on the palette here, so I'll whack it in. Uh-oh. Let's hope that's not another bug that's going to stuff it up. Let's see in a moment. So I'm going to have lending by the bank now having a function which I'm going to call tau underscore LB, and give that a value initially, say, of 1 year, but make it a minimum of 0.5 and a maximum of, say, 10 steps of 0.5. So lending by the banks will be related to the current level of loans outstanding. Divide that, wire it up. Back to the beginning again. Model it. And notice what's happening even before I touch anything. Aggregate demand is rising. Okay? Bank lending is creating new money, which is adding to circulation, adding to aggregate demand. That's the difference in the two visions. I'll just actually make that a slider now so I can play with it a bit. I've got a very high rate of lending. Let's actually make it quite low. And that's, imagine banks lend more rapidly. So rather than taking 10 years to double the loans, they'll take 1 year less, let's say half a year, and you get fairly dramatic change in the nature of the system. I'll just slow it down and make those lower values. Let's go back and edit that up and make it, say, minimum of I'll make the current value, say, 7 years, minimum of 2, maximum, I'm going to make quite large, of 100, and make the step size 2 as well. Okay, let's just go back and simulate that with a really low value. And not much is happening, but if the banks decide to lend more rapidly, then you're going to have an accelerating rate of growth in the economy, or slow down, etc., etc. So changes in the rate at which banks are willing to lend makes a huge difference, because it's increasing the liability side of the banking sector, and that's what determines the supply of money in the economy. So debt is vital. It's the flip side of the amount of money in the economy, and the growth in the amount of money, which is endogenous, gives you growth in the GDP as well. So not just can I support the endogenous money case with the empirical data I've been through, but I've also got the impact on the modelling and showing you the different nature of the two models. But now to link this to a model of the physical economy, which I'll do next week, which means in videos for you guys, because I'll be in Brazil at the time. I'm going to model Goodwin's growth cycle model in this software package. And this is something which I think you should have learned right from day one of your economics. It's a cyclical model of the economy. I'll start from the simplest possible argument of saying that you have GDP. Then if you divide GDP by labour productivity, let's say you get 1 unit of output per worker, that can then tell you what the workforce is going to be. And given the workforce, if you divide the workforce by the population, let's say it's 110 people, 110 million people, whatever, that's going to give you the employment rate. And then let's feed that into a Phillips curve argument. So let's imagine Milton Friedman knows what he's talking about, and there actually is a non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. Let's imagine that's 5%. If I subtract the employment rate from let's bring a couple of blocks in here before I forget, and a couple of divide by blocks there. Let's wire that up so far. So GDP divided by labour productivity gives you how many workers you need to employ. Divide workers by population, you get the employment rate. Subtract that from Nehru, and you've got the slope of the change of the wage function, or rather the pressure causing change in the wage. You then multiply that by the slope of the Phillips curve. So I bring in, say, like I'll call it, say, Phil's slope, and give it, let's say if unemployment's 1% below Nehru, then wages increase by 10%. We give this a value of 10. And that now is the percentage rate of change. That's the rate of change of wages. Let's wire that up. Now I'm going to bring in, I'm talking about the rate of change of wages here, so I've got to bring a rate of change function in. I chose to leave. Or did I? I hope it's not. lost in there somewhere. Here's W for wage. Let's say the initial wage is 0.9 units. So that's, if I now take the wage variable, copy it, and multiply all this by the NAIRU factor, that'll be the percentage rate of change of wages. That's just doing the same old, flipping 1 over W to WFE equals the rate of change of wages. Now, if I multiply wages by the workforce, and I can now flip this variable around, I want to make a loop here. If I multiply those two together, and flip that, what's going on here? Bloody hell. Let's just do it back the other way. I'll try this direction. Let's flip that around as well. Hopefully that's all there is to it. Let's see. Okay, for some reason it didn't work there. Let's now flip it and okay, that worked all right. You can also change the lines to curves, by the way, by doing that sort of thing, just to make stuff neater. That's now the wage bill. Okay. Now, if you subtract the wage bill from GDP, in this simple model, you have profit. Oh dear. Oh shit. Far out. Oh bloody hell, I'm stuck. That's a, I better leave it at that, I'm afraid. There are bugs in the software, as I've said. This is why I want to get money to help develop it further. But I'll build that model and put it up on the... What you handle me doing a build now? Starting again? Can you cope? 5 minutes worth? Yeah. Okay. I'll keep on going. I can save that and show it to Russell and show it. Pardon? You're going to bugger off, are you? Okay. Tell you what, I'll load the model. It's an easier way to go about it. I've got to shut it down. So I'll just... Where's the original there down? Okay, let's end the process. I'll load what I was trying to build there, just to make it faster. Okay. What I was trying to build there is this lot. So what I've got, let's keep it going. So I've got the workforce here, that's profit. In the simple model, all profits invested. Investments are rate of change of capital stock. Divide capital stock by the accelerator, you get GDP. Okay? So you actually tied the whole thing up together again, and you simulate it, and you get a cyclical economy. Okay? That's why it's worth seeing. And remember, it actually looks very much like a credit-to-prey system I showed you earlier, and a lot of people think it's just a credit-to-prey model applied to economics. But I think this is actually the simplest possible causal cyclical model in capitalism, because all you're saying is output determines employment, employment determines the rate of employment, that determines the rate of change of wages, that gives you profit, invest or profit, you integrate it, you're back to capital again. And yet rather than being a system that reaches equilibrium, it gives you a limit cycle, just like I've shown you beforehand with the credit-to-prey models. So it's a coincidental similarity, but it's not a causal. It's not a case of twisting one model and get a credit-to-prey model to work in capitalism. It's actually a very fundamental element of the actual behavior of the capitalist system. Let's just show the credit-to-prey dynamics here. And what you get is that same cycle that I showed you beforehand. But notice there's no nonlinearity assumed. The nonlinearity comes out of the fact you're multiplying the wage by the workforce. Okay? And that's what I'm now going to do in the next lecture, is take this model and combine it with the monetary model and build a combined monetary physical model of the economy. But hopefully, if Russell gets any more code cutting when he's in China on holidays, with less bugs. To wait and see. Thanks, guys. See you in a few weeks' time.